Welcome to Recipes for Grief, heartfelt storytelling for feely foodies. I'm your host, Andrea Sexton Dumas. Welcome to episode 13 with Kristin Tappan. She shares about her easygoing grandmother, Connie, and surviving a 16-day coma and near-death experience. Yes, you heard me right. She also shares about something that her grandmother modeled for her, which was having really strong friendships in adulthood. And that was actually key to her surviving her near-death experience. Kristin Tappan is originally from LA. She found her way to the Bay Area for college and now splits her time between the two. Kristin is a marriage and family therapist, a blogger, and of this January, a podcaster. Most of her free time is spent on experiences, whether that be travel, music festivals, or quality time with loved ones. Kristin, thank you so much for being on Recipes for Grief.
I'm excited.
Me
Thanks
too.
for having me.
Absolutely. So I'll start with asking you the question I ask everyone, which is, how are you sleeping recently?
Surprisingly decently. And I think that I'm surprised by it because I've had quite a bit going on. And I think the holidays are like a tricky time for people, whether they're grieving or not. But I think even more so if there is some grief layered in there.
Yeah.
And one of my friends and I were talking a couple of days ago about like, is my quality of sleep better because I've like reached a point where I really make an effort to not allow outside things or people not allow me to like get what I need? Or is it that I am just at such a point of exhaustion
That part.
that my body's like, girl, if we do not get these hours, you will be a homicidal maniac. Like, and that is not a good look for anyone,
Right.
Especially a therapist. Probably not on brand.
Perhaps not. And so it's either or, right?
Or maybe a combo, you know? Maybe it's like the work I've been doing and being so exhausted.
Yeah.
But I've been sleeping, on average, I'd say probably like 7 hours a night. I'm at an age where I prefer to get 8.
Yes.
Didn't used to require anything more than 5. Your 30s are a weird time.
Wait till you get to your 40s.
Oh my gosh, I can't. I'm gonna be like 10 hours.
It's lovely at 10.
10 hours in melatonin and sleepy time tea.
And maybe a nap in the daytime too.
Listen, I might as well be a cat.
You know what? It's not a bad life, especially if you're my cat.
Oh my gosh.
So I'd love to start with talking about your childhood. You know, I know that you grew up in an intergenerational home and that really influenced who you are. So can you first just start by sharing with us, like, who was in that home and how did they affect you growing up?
Yeah, I think one thing that I think is important to note is that I'm like the oldest kid and oldest grandkid. And I think that that's like, it's a different level of connection with the capital A adults because you're like the guinea pig, right? So they're like, we've never done this before, or it's been so long since there's been like a baby or a small child in the house. And my parents are together off and on, honestly, throughout my entire life, sometimes for longer spurts than others. But I think that like the constants were my grandparents. Like their house is what I view as home. And I saw my parents on a day-to-day basis. But like even now, if someone's like, think of home, the house that I think of is my grandparents' home. And so it was my grandmother, my grandfather, and this is on my mom's side. So her mom and her, technically it's her stepdad, but he raised her and we don't use the word step.
Yeah.
And then my mom, my aunt, so like her sister, my uncle, her brother, and then me. And then I'd see my dad at least 5 days a week. And this is when I was like small. And then when my parents got back together, we just moved a few blocks. And it was me, my dad, my mom, and then about a year later, my brother. And then when I was about 10, my mom, brother, and I moved back in with my grandparents. And they just had like an open door policy, had enough bedrooms and bathrooms for everyone anyway. And even if they didn't, they would have made it work.
That's right.
That's just how it works. And so we were back there from the time I was like 10 to 13. And then my parents bought a house. And then my mom, dad, brother, and I moved maybe like 11 or 12 minutes from my grandmother's or grandparents' house.
Much further.
That felt far. Like, why were we so dramatic? I'm like, oh my gosh, like, there's more stoplights. Technically, we could take a freeway. And then I lived in that house with my mom, dad, and brother until I was like 17, and then moved to the Bay Area for college. And my parents and brother lived in that house until maybe like 3 years ago. Okay. And now it's just my dad there. And my brother lives somewhere else in LA, and my mom lives in her own place also in LA. Okay. So yeah, I think that for me, when I think of childhood, I think of mainly positive things surrounding my grandparents, and then some definite positive moments with my parents, but more like inconsistencies. And I think that I know that my dad did not have like a positive relationship modeled for him. But I think that sometimes the confusion comes from knowing that my mom had a really great relationship modeled for her. So I was like, I know that you know what this could look like. And so then some of the work that my mom has been doing lately in her own therapy for the first time ever is exploring the like guilt and like layers that she feels over us being in a home that was like quite toxic when we were not living with my grandparents, and coming to terms with the fact that like that's a choice that she made for me, my brother, and herself. And I think that it's hard for parents to grapple with being part of like what caused their children harm.
Absolutely. There's this great quote, I'm sure it's a bumper sticker somewhere, that's like, you were the reason someone else is in therapy. And we all, it's especially like the more responsibility you have and the more lives that you're affecting, the more you really need to sit with that idea.
Yes.
It's like you are not just an entity in and of yourself. Your decisions matter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like one of my therapist friends sent this to me, and it was like, the reason why I'm in therapy is because the people in my life that need to go to therapy will not go. And I was like, that's why we all have clients.
Exactly.
Like, how sad.
It's true. And yet we thank you guys so much.
Right. Like, I'm like, well, my door's open. Like, come on in.
That's right. That's right. And so one of those decisions that was made for you that perhaps your mother has grappled with, who knows, that's her own journey, is not going to your great aunt's funeral. Yes. So can you tell us about her? I believe you called her Amy.
Yes, I did. So Amy lived with my grandparents that first time that I was living there. So before my brother was born. And my grandmother is kind of like the glue between her and her two sisters. And definitely always had like the more, I call it like stable household / environment. And so when Amy needed the place to go, it was like, let me go to California, go live with Connie and, LaRon and whoever else was in the house at the time. And, I think because I didn't know any different, I thought that everyone was living in multi-generational households. Like, Same. Isn't that just the vibe? And so, we curl up and watch cartoons together. Sometimes she'd have me watching something that my grandmother wouldn't want her to have me watching. My uncle did the same thing. Like, he would get in trouble for having me watch like Married with Children, and my grandmother would be like, Kristin is 7. Like, this maybe isn't the vibe. But anyway, so I spent a lot of time with Amy, and we'd have like our little nap time together and things like that. And I just didn't know that drugs were something that she struggled with, because I think that there's just like certain things that you're shield it from as, someone that's in kindergarten. That's just not what you're being exposed to. And it didn't seem, from what I remember, like there was like this long process of her like being sick and you like watching someone decline. It seemed like one day she was good, and then not many days after that, they were like explaining to me what death was. And I think that something I do think that they did well was they didn't like lie to me about like where she was, and I've seen parents and families do that, and I'm like, this is so damaging to the kid. And I'd rather like work with them on like ways that we can talk about death in a healthy way, in a digestible way for a child. So I do give them credit for that, but I think that one of the rough things was because they hadn't dealt with explaining death to a young child, they also didn't really know like what's appropriate. Like, oh, well, is it going to be like more traumatizing for Kristin to be in a space in a funeral with like, 100 people crying? And, I think that they were more concerned about that. And I remember just being like really bothered and being like, well, why am I not like allowed to go? Because it felt like this is something that like my whole family was getting to do for Amy. And I'm like, I'm part of that family. And everyone's talking about how much they're going to miss her. And like, I miss her. And right. So I think that there's a lot of power in allowing a child to have a choice. I also do acknowledge that, this is in 1994. Right. So even now, there aren't a lot of Black people in therapy, but especially in 1994, it's like they weren't like consulting with any like mental health professionals. They were just like doing what they each thought was best at that point in time. And I can respect that that was their intention. But I don't think that they thought about like the impact. And so, and something that I'm always talking to family, friends, clients about is the importance of impact, and that I would argue that it is just as important, if not more important, than intention. And it's like your intentions could be great, but like if the action is causing harm or distress, then it's like the person's going to remember the impact more than they're going to remember the intention.
Yeah.
And so, fortunately, the next time someone like important passed, I was about 12. And for that, they not only allowed me to go, and this is for my mom's brother, my uncle, but I think because of how things went the first time with Amy, they also allowed my 6-year-old brother to go. And that I don't think would have been the case had they not gotten like grief from me about going to the first like big family funeral.
Right. And I just want to underscore, they got that grief from you and you were under 12 years old. Like this is between the ages of 7 and 12, but you were telling your family, I should have been there.
Oh, like 4 and 12. Okay. Like literally like, do you rather?
Out of the mouths of babes. Just thinking about, little Kristin and the impact of, this loss and not being able to honor this loss within the family. Can you tell me a little bit about your relationship with your grandmother, Connie?
Oh, I love her. When I think of ease and like safety and power and compassion, like all of the best words I think of her. And my mom like tells this story frequently about how, my grandmother was a very young mom. She was married with 2 kids by the time she was 16. Which I'm like, girl, could not be me. But 60s Oklahoma times were different. But anyway, I think that people would assume that because of that, like her home might have like lacked structure, been a little wilder. And it was like the exact opposite. Like she was like, if anything, I have to really be on my P's and Q's to be sure that these kids aren't like running this household, that they have what they need. So I think that one of my favorite stories that captures a lot of who she is one of my mom's friends was pregnant like their senior year of high school. And the first person she told was my grandmother. Like, not even my mom, not anyone from their friend group, not anyone from her family. She was like, I need to go see Miss Connie. And like, so like when my mom got home from like school and work that day, like her friend was there, like
talking to her mom.
Like they were sitting in my mom's bedroom, like on opposing twin beds, like, you know, chopping it up. And my grandmother like helped her find a way to talk to her parents and, you know, talk about what this is going to look like and talk about how her life is going to change and talk about how like there is still life after children too, and like you can do both and blah 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 blah, and just no judgment, but also like keeping it real, like things are going to look, you know, different than you're not going to be like hanging out with your little friends directly after school. Like we're going to have some real responsibilities.
Yeah.
And I think that like who she was to my mom's friend is like who she was to everyone. Like that's who she was to me, to my friends, to my mom and all the rest of her friends. I think she really modeled a lot of what like adult friendship looks like. And I can see it in the way that I navigate my own friendships. Like she was still going on like girls trips to Vegas with her friends yearly, like same crew, like deep into their 60s and 70s. Like, and I'm like, that's me. Like she had family, she had friends, she had a career. Like I was like, oh, so it is possible to do it all and have it all.
Yeah.
And she talks about how maybe the timeline looks different for certain people. She would talk about how, you know, she had to get married a second time before she found what she really needed. And she was like, there's no shame in that.
That's right.
And I was like, good for you to file for divorce in the late 60s as a 20-year-old with 2 kids. Wow. Like, so many people would have just been like, I guess I'm staying.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that my relationship with her evolved over the years. When I was younger, she very much was like my grandmother. And she was good at setting the boundary of, I'm your grandmother who is friendly, but I am not your friend because you are still a child.
That's right.
And there's just certain things that I need to help you navigate that you're only going to be able to do if I'm approaching it in this way. And then there was like this shift once I was going off to college of like, and she even came here with me to my orientation. And so there was this shift of like, I'm still your grandmother and I'm your grandmother first, but like now there is space for us to be friends too. Yes. And I think that there's something so magical about like having the luxury of being able to be friends with your grandparents and like adulthood. Like I was able to call her and talk about like things that were going on at work and ways in which I wanted to approach different situations, chat with her about you know, issues that I might be having in a romantic relationship, get her opinion on maybe one of my friends that's having a tough time and ways to show up and support them, issues that I was having with my parents and how to be able to like respectfully advocate for myself. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is so cool to like get a happy hour and like cheers with pomegranate martinis with my grandmother. That's like, that's the forever vibe.
Yes.
So even though she passed at a young age for her, because she was such a young mom and grandmother, I got 27 years with her, which I didn't realize was a long time until she passed. And some of my friends that had their own relationships with her were like, what a blessing to have your grandmother for 27 years. All of my grandparents were dead by the time I graduated from high school. And I was like, and it had just never even occurred to me that so many people were already without grandparents by that age and stage. It didn't make me miss her any less. But I certainly think that it like created room for like gratitude with my grief instead of just being like fully submerged in the grief, being like, okay, like I can be sad and like upset that there's big things that she's going to be missing. And I can be like bitter that she won't see my kids. While also being like, my grandmother moved me into my first 1-bedroom apartment, and we would do road trips together, and we would have calls at least once a week, even when I lived in the Bay and she lived in LA. And, you know, she knew the deepest and darkest secrets of mine. And I'm like, none of that changes even with her leaving earlier than what I would have wanted her to. In an unrealistic way, I think. I thought that she was just like ageless. Like in my dream world, we would just like die on the same day.
That's right.
Like it's like I'll be old and you'll just be older. But like I was like, okay, like maybe you'll be like my dad's grandmother that lived to be like, I think like 110 or something like that. So I was like, okay, well, if she's 110 and she's about 40 years older than me, like I was like, I would take going at 70 if it meant that like she could live till 110.
1,000%.
Yeah. I haven't said that one out loud yet. People are probably like, girl.
But y'all don't know our grandmothers.
Listen. So say that louder for the people in the back.
Absolutely. Yeah, y'all really don't know our grandmothers. And so let me say, I had a very similar experience when I moved away to college and I moved into the dorms in Long Beach. And my first phone call home, my grandmother said, "Oh, Pum Pum, now we can be friends." Oh, I know.
I love that.
I know.
She's like, you're a capital A adult now.
That's right.
There's space for us.
It wasn't like me leaving the house, like packing up the car. It was like once I got to the next destination.
You're grown now.
Now you're grown.
You're grown and we're friends.
That's right. That's right. Well, also, I just have to share with you, last night as I was preparing for our podcast today, our recording today, your grandmother just was on my mind so much. Like I'm making tea and I'm just like, Connie, girl, like she was just so present with me. So like, I just feel so much like warmth and comfort and like ease. I feel the ease.
Oh, I love that.
I feel the ease. I'm like, y'all can't see me, but like, I'm very emotional.
Wait, I love that. Here's what's so special about this. The timing of this is so funny. So you would not be able to tell by my apartment, but I am not a Christmas person. I actually hate Christmas. Like I'm like literally a real life Scrooge or Grinch. But then, and normally I don't even decorate for Christmas.
Wow.
And this year, my favorite holiday is Thanksgiving and the simplicity of it. Even though I certainly acknowledge that I feel like I've reframed Thanksgiving for myself because I'm like, listen, like we have to acknowledge like the land, what this means.
That's right.
Like those pieces. I'm more talking about just being like, show up in what you're comfortable in, eat some good food, drink and go home. And so Christmas just really isn't my jam. However, it was my grandmother's favorite holiday. And this past Thanksgiving, I was in a hospital hotel all week with my dad because he was undergoing a stem cell transplant, which went really well. And I would do it all over again if need be. But because I was missing my favorite holiday months ago, I was like, I'm going to do a little like Christmas cocktail situation with like my girlfriends. And all last night, I was like, oh my God, my grandmother would just love this so much. Like, as I like, you know, decorated and got things together and prepped some sangria and made red velvet cupcakes, I was like, this is like very much her vibe. And I was like, I feel like she's here. So we were likely being surrounded by Connie at the same time.
That's right. Welcome to the Bay, Connie. Miss Connie, excuse me.
Yes. No, she would be totally fine with Connie.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. So your relationship with your grandmother after she passed away, well, actually, before we get to that, I do just want to circle back to that first Christmas after Miss Connie passed away.
Jesus Christ.
Or maybe, or not. We don't have to.
No, we certainly can. I think that first Christmas, I was just talking about this a few days ago with my friend Anthony. So I talked to my grandfather, and luckily I had just moved back to LA, maybe like 2 or 3 months after she passed, and that was always the plan. So I have a slew of emotions around like, should I have been back earlier? Blah blah blah. Even though I was finishing up grad school, so the timing was what it was. But around like October, I'm like, oh, Papa, like, what do you want to do for Christmas Eve? Like, I understand if you don't want to host. And he was like, well, no, like, I'd love to have it here, but like, I just don't really know what to do. He's like my job is I cook the prime rib and I go get a tree, and everything else Connie would do. Mm-hmm. And he's like, so, but no, I'd like to have you all here. And like, just like looks at me from his armchair. And like my internal dialogue is like, oh shit. And externally I was like, okay, Papa, well, like if you're gonna do the prime rib and get the tree, like I'll do everything else. And it's like, as the words left my mouth, I was like, Kristin, you don't even like this holiday. Like, and you were deeply submerged in your own grief. Mm-hmm. But my grandfather also like literally never asks for anything. And like borderline didn't even ask then. It was like, that was like as close to an ask.
Right.
As he was going to get. So I was like, hey. And so I like just decided that Connie would carry me through Christmas. And I just was like, I'm going to do all the things that she would do. So sat down, made a list of everyone that she normally shops for, talked to my grandfather about a budget. He handed me a lot of cash and some gift cards to go do some shopping. My grandmother didn't used to write names on gifts. The way that she would do it was she'd be like, okay, like, Andrea, like your color is, and you wouldn't know it until that day.
Oh, wow.
And it'll be like, anything with gold, that's your gift. Kristin, anything with emerald, those are your gifts.
Oh,
like, Marcus, anything with ruby red, those are your gifts. And it was so brilliant because when we were kids, there was nothing for us to shake under the tree because you didn't know. It's so good.
That's brilliant. Parents take note.
Yeah. So we either had our own wrapping paper or we'd have like bows that corresponded with our color for that year. And your color was always on rotation.
Of course. Gotta switch it up.
Gotta keep them on their toes. So I made like 6 side dishes and 2 desserts from scratch and did all the shopping. And then Anthony happened to be in town and doing Christmas with me that year. And that was the plan even before my grandmother had passed. And so when he circled back with me, I had like forgotten that invitation had been extended. And I was like, oh my God. And at first I was like dreading it because I was like, I like don't have the bandwidth to host fucking anyone. Like I'm barely hanging on by a thread. And then God bless him because I feel like Earthside, he carried me through Christmas. And then like from above, she carried me through Christmas. And so everything went the way that it was supposed to. Things that we needed to pivot on, Anthony just stepped up. Like we got to my grandfather's house on the 23rd to just do some prep work. My cousin's only job was to decorate the tree with ornaments that were already at the house. We walk in, the tree is like just bare. I was like,
of course.
Okay. So like me doing all the shopping, doing all this cooking, doing all this gift wrapping, like that's not enough. I guess I'm just like fucking Mrs. Claus now.
That's right.
So Anthony's just like, I think he could just see the panic like sweep over me. And he was like, sit in the chair. And I was like, I can't sit. I have to. And he was like, sit in the chair. And I sat there and he like put the ornaments in my lap with the hooks. And he was like, you hook, hand them to me. I placed them. And so I was like the little artistic director from the chair. And so Anthony and I were actually just talking about that Christmas like a couple of days ago over dinner. And he was like, I still remember your grandmother's like, oh, because my grandmother did cook some collard greens. That was his vegetable contribution. He's like, those greens are so good. I was like, they were the best. And so I think that even though there was still so much grief that Christmas, I also was like, okay, like I can get through things without her being next to me, because I think that in some ways she just like is quite literally like within me. And my grandfather was like, oh my God, your grandmother would like love this so much. And sometimes he accidentally calls me Connie, and like he has like no cognitive issues, no like like it's genuinely, and he'll be like, and he'll like almost like shake himself like like back into reality, and he'll be like, you just remind me so much of her. And like we have like the same smile, same cheekbones. We both love hosting. We tell stories in a similar way. Like our facial expressions are the same. And so I think that it's like he gets like these glimpses of her when he's around me, which I'm sure is probably both like a blessing and a curse. Like I often wonder like how is this landing for him?
Yeah.
And that's a lot.
I'm sure it is.
Oh, Miss Connie girl.
Miss Connie. And so I know that since she passed, your relationship with her has deepened and transformed through your own hanging on by a thread.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm not exactly sure how to even, I feel like, should I just like do a spoiler alert?
Yeah, I'm like trigger warning. Like,
yes, trigger warning.
COVID talks coming up.
Yeah.
Which I mean, I feel like nearly everyone I know has been impacted. Well, everyone has been impacted by COVID in the pandemic, but I would say nearly everyone I know has also either like lost someone to COVID or had someone go through like some very serious illness with COVID or hospitalization. And in summer of 2021, I got like a terrible case of COVID, and I didn't have like any of the symptoms that you ordinarily hear about, which I think is such just like a mind fuck.
Yes.
Because not only am I like walking around thinking that I'm fine, I also had like tested that week at work because my job required it. I literally worked at a health center. So it's like an actual nurse is like administering these tests. Like this isn't like me maybe not doing something right. And everything's negative and everything's fine.
Yeah.
And I had a really bad headache one day that week. But like no fever, no loss of taste, no loss of smell. Me too. This isn't the time. Give me another half hour.
But we're recording.
Right.
This is fun. This is perfect.
He's like, let me let them know that I'm here.
That's right.
He's like, I was really annoyed that you were in the hospital for so long, so this is your payback.
That's
like,
right.
I hear what you're talking about.
Every time you talk about it,
yeah,
I'm gonna let you know.
He literally like picked up the squirrel. Me too. So, I had a wedding on August 14th, and after the wedding, or at the wedding, I wasn't feeling very well. And normally, I'm a good time in the wedding. Like, I'm like definitely the girl that's gonna be on the dance floor. I'm taking advantage of the open bar that's there. Like, I'm excited. And I very distinctly remember only having like one Modelo and half a glass of rosé, and I was like, yeah, something's not right. So I left the wedding early, and apparently I fell asleep in the car and my breathing sounded really labored to my friends, and I was like not wanting to get out of the car. And they had to like leave me in the car for a while. And eventually I got this little like bolt of energy, ran upstairs to my apartment, and just like stripped down and crawled into bed and was like, good night. And they just like couldn't shake this feeling that like something was like more wrong. And so they called one of my best friends, Angelica, to be like, what do we do here? Like, do we call? We don't want to call her mom because my mom was already not feeling well. We later find out that she also had COVID.
Wow.
So they talk with Angelica. Angelica's like, well, let me call Marcus, my brother. And luckily, Anne just very close with my family. And so she has all of their contact. Calls Marcus. Marcus is like, oh, let me just like send my dad over because he's like, I have work at like 4 o'clock in the morning. And so I'll send my dad over and he'll like inspect, evaluate, whatever. My dad comes over damn near in a hazmat suit because he like has to protect himself. He's in his 60s, type 2 diabetic, sometimes has high blood pressure. Luckily at that point did not have cancer yet because what a shit show that would have been. So he comes in, double gloved up, double KN95, like, and he's like, you know, police knocking on my door. He is a retired LAPD lieutenant, so that's fitting. And I open the door, like, surprised that he's at my place. And I open the door to my bedroom. My friends had let him in. And he's like asking me questions, but I'm answering all of them fine. And then he like takes my temperature. I have no fever.
Wow.
And he's like, so then he like takes off his mask to be like, okay, like, he's like, maybe you're just having like a really bad bout of like heat stroke or exhaustion because it had been like triple digits that whole week in LA. I had moved like all these boxes into my new office at work. I had been having to wear a mask indoor and outdoor, very strict policy at this job. And so sometimes I'd feel like lightheaded after moving, you know, 30, 40, 50-pound boxes in 105-degree heat, like in a mask. And so so he was like, maybe it's just rest that you need, like, yeah, because like you're checking out fine. And he's like, okay, honey, like I'll call you tomorrow. And that's like the last thing I remember because that Sunday where I was supposed to be getting my hair done, I still have the text messages to my hairstylist. I'm literally typing gibberish. It literally looked like a 3-year-old, which is like on the keyboard. And my friend Melissa said that I was like holding the DirecTV remote up to my face like it was the phone, like losing it.
Wow.
And she told my mom, like, I'm not comfortable getting on my flight to go back to Sacramento and leaving her here like this. And my mom was like, don't miss your flight. Like, I'll rally, I'll go over. And my mom ended up needing to get me transported because after consulting with the hospital helpline, they were like, oh, your daughter should not be having like issues with memory and like cognitive functioning like this at 31. And they were like, oh, it's because there's like not enough oxygen reaching her brain, which is back to COVID symptom. And so they transport me to the hospital. So I get admitted August 15th, and I'm in a coma from August 15th to August 31st. Woke up on one of my best friend's birthdays, which she literally was like, that was your gift to me, because she didn't even want to celebrate that year. And her family was like, Kristin would want you to have a family dinner. 100% true. I'm such a birthday person.
Yeah, but like if your best friend is in a coma.
Yeah, and she was just like all sad. And then like my mom sends a group text that day being like, she's awake. And I was in the hospital, I think for a total of like 35 or 36 days.
Wow. So
from like mid-August to like late September. And while I was in this coma, had no idea why I was in the hospital, but knew that I was in a hospital. And I had like such vivid dreams. And my grandmother has come to me in dreams before, but like this was like the most she's ever come to me, and in the way that seemed the most like her, like textures and scents and sounds and visually. And she kept we like were drinking sweet tea the way that we ordinarily would be. And she was in like a little purple velour tracksuit, which is like very much her like casual, like I'm running errands fit.
But still cute.
But still cute, you know? And she kept, when we were leaving, or when I was leaving her because we were in her living room, she was like, I was like, okay, like, I was like, I'll see you later. And she was like, yes, but not here. Like, you can't come back here. And I'm like looking at her like, huh? And she kept like repeating it and kept being like, I'll come to you. Like I will see you, but like let me come see you. And I'm looking at her like, what? Like, especially because by the time I moved back to LA, my grandmother had already passed. So her saying that she would come to see me was very bizarre because it's like she had never been to my South Pasadena apartment.
Right.
So it's like the last time I saw her in the flesh that was not in the hospital was in her living room. So it's like I was like, this is like not tracking. But she like wouldn't let me leave until I agreed that I would not come back there to see her. And so finally I was like, fine. Like I won't come back here to see you. Like it's whatever.
Even though this is my home too.
Right. Like yeah. Guess I'm signing up to never see Papa here either. But then it's like, I then realized that it's because like I was like literally flirting with death. And she's like, you're on the other side with me. Don't get comfortable. Right. Like you're not done on earth yet. Like, so yeah, like I will be coming to see you.
Yeah,
because,
but
like,
do not come back here.
Like we don't need it.
Right. And understand it.
Yes.
Right. Like the fact that she wouldn't even let you leave until you like agreed to it.
She's like, no, I need you to acknowledge what you're hearing. And I was like, oh, okay. So, yeah. So when I woke up and was totally fine, cognitively, and all my organs were functioning the way they needed to be, and my lungs have no permanent scarring, which is wild.
Wow.
They were like, the doctors, they were floored, and they also were like, tell us more about these dreams. And I had overheard conversations that they had been having, and some people would walk in and I would be like, oh, you have a son, his name's Ben, blah blah blah, and they would be like, and I was like, well, they say hearing's the last thing to go. Like, be careful about what you're saying.
That's right. Y'all hear that?
Yes. And I thought it was interesting because a couple months before I went to the hospital, I had had my first ever psychic reading.
That's right.
And in my reading, my psychic told me that I was going to be like very, very, very sick. And like she was saying it with like intensity like that. And she was like, I know that you've been taking your health more seriously lately, but like rev it up. And so I went from that March, I had hired a personal trainer. And this reading was in like late May, early June. And I had been seeing the trainer 2 days a week, but then school was about to get out. I was a therapist at the high school. And I was like, oh, well, I'm going to have more time on my hands. So then I upped it to 4 days a week with a trainer and an hour a week of swimming. And the doctors were like, your increased lung capacity from you being active for at least 90 days before getting COVID is like quite literally what saved you. And my grandmother came through in that reading with her and was like, I know that part of the reason why you're doing all of this is because like you're worried that you're not going to be able to have kids. And she was like, I'm with your kids right now. Like that doesn't even need to be something that you're pressed about. Like your kids are good, they're healthy, they're with me.
Wow. When
ready, I'll send them to you. Like it's fine.
No big deal.
Don't sweat it. Like we're chilling. The kids are probably drinking sweet tea too.
That's right.
So I think that like my grandmother sent that message for me to that medium. And then if Connie's saying something, I'm listening.
Yes, ma'am. Me too, by the way.
Right. So I was like, okay. So I was like, I have the time, I have the resources. So like, why not?
Yeah.
Rather that, why not invest in myself? Like, and do so without feeling guilty about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did. And it was like such a good decision.
Yeah. You saved your own life.
Yeah.
You actually have this quote on your blog. Self-care is not an expense, it's an investment.
I think that was my very first blog post after being released.
Yeah.
Like it took me a while to write it, but I think that we like live in a society where you have to like explain why you're taking care of yourself or like justify like why you're spending money on therapy or a chiropractor or an Equinox membership if that's what like floats your boat. And I used to view working out as like sacrificial, like I'm working out and like I'm having to give up doing XYZ in order to do this, or I'm spending hundreds or $1,000 a month on these personal training sessions, and 500 of that could be in savings, and the other 500 could be on travel or music festival tickets or whatever, right? And then it like occurred to me that, well, if I want to be around to do all that shit,
that part,
then like, what am I doing to guarantee that I'm going to be able to show up for that? And then that's when like the shift started happening of like, okay, well, I'm investing in me and I want to be able to carry at least one of my own kids. And more importantly, I want to be able to be around for my kids.
Yeah.
I don't want my kids being like 10 attending the funeral of their mom because like I wasn't taking care of myself. And I've always been a big girl and most of my family is the same. But I also think that it's different to be like big and active, big and healthy, big and moving around a lot. Versus like I felt like there had been this shift where I had like started to feel more sluggish, even though I've always been active, like from like a social component, like I'm going on the vacation, I'm going to the music festivals, I'm going to this, I'm going to that.
Absolutely. And let me just say for the record, your blog is keepupwithktap.com. Like it is, you have to keep up with her for real, y'all. Like you have to keep up. She is in these streets.
I'm on the move.
On the move.
But I was like, man, and maybe it was also hitting, those 30s, but I was like, I don't have the same energy that I used to have. Like, what am I doing to be able to kind of like combat that? And I think it really helped to reframe self-care as something that I'm like investing in and investing in me, versus being like, there's so much money going out for XYZ. It's like, yeah, there should be. It's like if I'm willing to spend money to upgrade my plane ticket or willing to spend money on a VIP Coachella ticket versus a general admission Coachella ticket, then like, why am I not also willing to invest in like my health, my wellness?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, your story just touches me every single time because you may not have been here. So like, just like the fact that I can sit here with you and like hear this story in person is just...
It's wild when you put it that way.
Right?
Yeah, no, but I hear you.
Yeah.
Like, shout out to some of my clients. I felt so bad for them because there are some clients that I see outside of the school setting and I've like literally never missed a session, right? So I'm the person where if I'm running 3 minutes late, I will text them ahead to be like, oh, like, know that we're supposed to start at 10. This meeting I'm currently in is running a little over. I'll be signing on at about 10:03. Don't worry, we'll still go the full 50 minutes. Thank you for your flexibility. Like, so when I just didn't show up to these sessions, one of my clients' moms literally was like calling morgues because she was like, Kristin's like, she's dead somewhere.
And
because
for a
like,
good reason, because you would have been.
She set up a Google alert because she was like, well, something's like, she's been abducted. Like, I don't know. And she was like, yeah, I don't know what's happening. And then when I came to and had like several hundred text messages.
Oh my gosh.
From family, friends, clients, coworkers, I had to be like, at first I was responding, opening them in batches of 100 each day.
Oh my gosh.
Until I could catch up. And then I realized on day 2, I need to start typing in names of people that like I need to immediately reply to or see, like, have they sent me something? And someone was like, oh no, your bubbles have turned green. Like, it was like, I was like seeing the breakdown happen. And I was like, so then it was like wild because I felt like I had to like work through some like post-traumatic stress that me being just off the grid caused for my clients too. So that part was like, and for friends and family, of course, too. But my clients, I was like, oh my God, like one of them was like, you're the only stable person in my life. Oh. Like, you're the only person that consistently shows up.
Wow.
Like, girl.
First of all, you need better friends.
Right. and now she has them.
Good. That
was part of our work together.
Good.
You know?
Thank you.
I have to get there.
Yes. Well, and I just have to say, you know, you're reminding me of your grandmother right now in this moment of like, you know, when you started off telling us how she, you know, was taking girls trips with her friends and like, you know, she had a wide community and she was even a safe place for her daughter's friends.
Yes.
And you inhabit that same zone of like, you're a community oriented person, you're a family oriented person. And like, like you mysteriously being sick, you know, like that created a real void in people's lives.
Yeah, and I really didn't realize it. Like, there's still things that I'm learning about that time. And my friends will be like, oh, like this text thread, because my mom had like 3 or 4 different text threads going to try and keep people looped in, and just like messages that were being sent and prayers that were being sent. And it was just, it's like, I know that I'm very fortunate to have the network that I do and the friends that I do. But I think that this happening, like, it brought some of my friends closer to one another. And I think it also had my family understand like why I've chosen the friends that I've chosen. Like, because I think that sometimes, especially my mom, she didn't like go away to school. She, up until recently, had never lived on her own. And there was just less effort required to maintain her friendships. It's like most of her friends like lived within the same little like 10-mile radius of where they went to high school. And I think that she used to, well, I know that she used to think like, oh, like Kristin prioritizes her friends too much, or does too much for her friends, or blah, blah, blah. And then like the ways in which that my friends showed up for my mom in droves, she was like, oh, okay. She was like, yeah, they're all, and my mom has her own relationship with some of my friends, but it's like the appreciation for a wider group of them. It was wild.
Well, and even, you know, the fact that they didn't leave you. I mean, like the fact that they were like, something's wrong, we're gonna stay, we're calling your brother, like
let's troubleshoot.
Yeah. I mean, like there's situations I put myself in when I was younger and unstable, and like looking back, I'm like, wow, I called them people my friends, but like no one was saying, Dre, you're not all right.
Girl, where was the reciprocity?
Okay.
That was my theme word for this year.
That's my favorite word, actually. I love reciprocity.
Is it really?
It really is. It's been my favorite word for like a really long time. Lauren Hill. She brought it to me in high school.
Yes. This education is such a good album.
Yes.
Still bitter I missed her tour recently.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, it's an investment, so just put your pennies away for next time.
Yes, honestly.
So I want to be respectful of your time. I do have one last, well, I have more, but I have so many questions for you.
Let's do two.
Okay.
One that you want to ask, and then your final question that you said that you like to wrap up with.
Perfect. Okay, good. Thank you. So I did want to ask you, and I think this is actually in the book Beyond Grief, where your story was highlighted. The question was asking, how has your perspective changed, after Miss Connie passed? And you were talking about the way that it can shift you in a major way, often for the better, if you allow it. How has grief allowed you to change, or how have you allowed yourself to change through your grief?
I think that I allowed myself to feel more and feel more unapologetically. I think that frequently, as some of it's just my personality type. I'm an Aquarius. I'm very much an Aquarius. For those of you astrology kings and queens out there. Yeah, like
love.
Yeah, we're complex and we're layered for sure. But we're pretty like emotionally regulated, but sometimes I think almost to like a fault. And I think that grief has made me like face my emotions in a different way and realize, like, I compare it to like a trash can. So like I hate taking out the trash. It's my least favorite chore. And sometimes, you'll throw something away and you'll smush the trash down so that lid will shut, right? And then you can do that a few times and the lid will shut, but then eventually you will put some trash in and that lid just won't latch all the way. And then that odor permeates and you don't get to control what spills out. And I feel like when we continue to compress our emotions, stack it in, smush, eventually they spill out in a way that you can't control.
Wow.
And so I'm like, well, if I just like allow myself to feel grief as it comes, then I don't have to fully spiral. It's like sometimes I have to acknowledge that the spiral or the out of control piece was like self-induced because I wasn't allowing myself to feel what I really needed to feel.
Oh, now this wasn't going to be a therapy session for me, but you went there. So thanks a lot for that. I'm going to have to journal later on that one. And what a beautiful metaphor using trash. It's so true. Like I can just see the visual and it's true. It's like we try to smush it down.
Yeah. And it's not the vibe.
Yeah.
Gotta just handle it. So I think that that's been good. And I also think that my grandmother dying, even different than my uncle, really solidified for me that like grief does not have a timeline. Like I cannot tell someone when they should have worked through X aspect of their grief. Because there's times where I can talk about my grandmother like today and haven't cried once and have like laughed and it felt like light and good, even when talking about the heavier stuff. And then there's times where like seeing the car that she used to drive can wreck me. And I'm like having to re-glue my fucking eyelash on in the car. So it's like, and that doesn't mean that I haven't done the work. I think it's just acknowledging that like grief is layered, doesn't have a timeline, and that like you revisit stages and there's certainly more than 5 of them.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And so that does bring us to our last question, which is, we know that like grief equals love and love equals grief. We hold them both in our arms as best we can. How do you tend your grief and how do you tend your love?
I think I tend to my grief. Part of it was definitely doing some therapy around said grief. I'm also a journaler. I think that my blog has been helpful in tending to my grief. And then like having friends where grief is not like taboo to talk about. Like I don't only want to have friends that I'm like getting drunk with. Like I need to be able to have friends that I can have depth with as well. And perhaps you have different friends for different things.
Sure.
That could be true. But I think my favorite kind of friends are the friends that I can do both with. Like the friends that are down the road trip with me to Vegas and we don't go out one of the nights because we're curled up in pajamas and maybe talking about our grief and toasting with champagne to our favorite person that's passed. Yeah. And then maybe the next night we're like twerking at Drake's.
Ow.
Get you someone that could do both.
Yes.
So I think that's how I tend to it. And then I think I just have like more of an openness to love because as terrible as grief can be, I do have to acknowledge that like I can only be in this kind of pain because of like how intensely I loved and was loved by this person. And I think that we have to acknowledge that like grief is just part of that. So it's like if I'm choosing to allow myself to love and be loved, I'm also choosing at some point to sign up for grief.
Yeah.
And I think just knowing that, naming that is like a really good thing too.
Oh, well, that was really beautiful. Kristin, thank you so much for your time. This has been fantastic. And thank you, Miss Connie.
And thanks for making the trek.
Yes, of course. Yay, we did it. Yay. Stop recording. Thank you for listening to Recipes for Grief. You can find more information about today's guest on the podcast page of your player, as well as their recipe card that's available on my website, AndreaSextonDumas.com. That's AndreaSexton, D as in donut, UMAS.com. If you'd like to share your recipe for grief, leave a 3-minute voicemail at the following number, and your message may be played on a future episode as a listener shout out. That number is 510-426-6041. That's 510-426-6041. Find me on Instagram and TikTok at Recipes for Grief. And now, here's a little advice from my grandmother.
Life isn't easy. You just have to make the best of it.